Thank you so much, Harry. Welcome to everybody online. It's a privilege, and I want to thank Harry and Andrew, the team at African E-Development Resource Center, CIO East Africa, for giving me the opportunity to have this chat with you this afternoon. What Harry neglected to say is that he had the audacity to slip into Cape Town last month and out again without saying hello. So I hear I'm a dear friend. I don't feel very dear at the moment. So I just want to put it out there in the public space that Harry feels a little bit of heat.
I'm sorry, man. I'm sorry.
I
Okay.
I have a deep affinity for Kenya, in actual fact, for the African continent, but for Kenya specifically, due to the levels of innovation and ingenuity. And I really enjoy engaging with the Kenyan audience. As Harry has said, feel free to make any comments in the chat function. But I will leave ample time at the end for questions, because the questions is probably where it's going to get interesting. I may bore you a little bit, but then hopefully you have really interesting questions for us. So the topic, as Harry has said, is building digital resilience. It's a topic that's very top of mind at the moment. And I'd like to start off by saying that I read this blog this morning that Microsoft actually published this morning, and they said that they've mapped cyber attacks like phishing emails in every single country in the world since the start of the pandemic. So it's truly amazing that people actually use, or cyber criminals or the different threat actors actually use what's currently happening in the world to step up their attacks. We've seen in South Africa interesting spikes. I've seen in Kenya a normal cyclical nature, but it's no doubt that these criminals try to abuse and then use every opportunity that they find to step up their attacks. What is particularly prevalent at the moment is I have a suspicion that many of us may actually be working from our homes. And the challenge then for corporates is that my home network wasn't designed for a corporate environment. There's a router in here that's 3 years old, serving a wireless printer that was probably last updated 3 years ago, multiple phones and devices. And although my corporate laptop may be secure, we find that our corporate laptops extend into many nodes, and each of these nodes today may be a little bit problematic. And what we actually see then is a lot of interesting things in the news. I love that Positive Technologies, it says 97% of company networks carry traces of compromise. I think that's probably very real. The traces of compromise could sometimes be certain kinds of attacks that it permeates to an extent in a corporate network until it hits a demilitarized zone or a firewall or whatever the case may be. But it's certainly true that across the world, in East Africa and the rest of Africa and globally, we are finding that there's really, really interesting things happening both on the attack front and on the defense front. At one of the foremost conferences that I attended 2 years ago, it was all about using artificial intelligence to protect our corporate infrastructure. A year ago, it was how attackers are using artificial intelligence to have attacks that evolve on an ongoing basis as the technologies that we defend with are trying to stop them. So it's a little bit of a wild world out there. And the reality, there's also a lot of misinformation. And I just selected Zoom as a case study because there's so much nonsense written about Zoom in the last week or two. Now, do they have problems? Absolutely. Is everything written about them true? Without a shadow of a doubt, it's not. And I think for modern corporates, it's really, really important to also be able to, not just from the technical defense layers, also make sense from this overflow of information that's chucked in our particular direction. And my personal favorite about Zoom was when the New York school system yesterday or the day before announced that no teacher in New York is allowed to use Zoom anymore to teach. Now, if you spend a little bit more time and you understand where the realities is, yes, there's a little bit of a privacy risk in Zoom, because the encryption key in Zoom is issued either by a server in America or in China. Now, in all fairness, I think if we look at rogue states and we're looking at countries across the world that actually engage in dubious online activities, it's probably China, America, the USA, North Korea, and Russia in the lead. So The fact that the encryption key of 5 of the 48 servers are coming from China is a little bit of a concern. But then you're talking about educating children, and you need to then make a decision: is there another platform that makes sense in that particular context, and how much information is there now that I'm busy teaching a 4-year-old child about mathematics that it shouldn't necessarily be in the private domain. So there's also a lot of information that we need to, at an organizational level, have the ability to make sense of what people are actually saying. And that sometimes requires of us to scratch a little bit deeper so that we actually know what are the technologies that we could use and what are the technologies that we really shouldn't be using. Now, we see globally a little bit of an inequality, or probably a lot of inequality, in terms of then cybersecurity. So cybersecurity is the point of departure for digital resilience. And we can't really measure resilience, because resilience is a lot based on how we react when certain things are happening. We can measure, and there's a global cybersecurity index where they actually have 5 pillars. There's a regulatory, there's a legal, and there are multiple pillars. And they then have this composite indicator where they measure 25 different things, and based on the 25 different things, they would then rank countries globally. Now, the reason I use this map is that the same is probably true from a corporate environment as well. In this map, they would indicate which countries are doing well and which countries are doing poorly. In the African context, no surprise, the leading country is Mauritius. We know that Mauritius has molded their whole economy around digital and digital security, and but very highly ranked as well as Egypt, Kenya. You guys are on the top 5. South Africa is not in the top 5 in the continent. We have some real issues in certain places. So it gives us an idea that globally, different countries are ranked differently. And that's the challenge then at the corporate level as well. Different corporations are sitting at different levels of maturity when we deal with digital resilience. Now, you may sit there and say, well, that's not really my problem, because I know that we're doing well. Ultimately, we find ourselves in the business network. We found ourselves in a network of suppliers, clients. And if you ask, for instance, a bank in Kenya, what is your biggest concern? They would be concerned about the behavior of their clients. So it's fine securing your corporate networks, but if your client's behavior actually compromises your systems, then there's not an awful lot that you can do from within the IT department within the company. You have to then ask yourselves, so how do I secure my entire supply chain and business network chain? So on that, I'm going to try to launch a poll. If it crashes and burn, I will just run away and I will leave Harry to deal with the fallout of all of this. But there is a polling function, and I'm going to try to launch a poll. And the polling question that I'm going to launch is, do you have a business continuity plan? So for your organization, do you have a business continuity plan? I have clicked a button. It says start polling. And I hope you can see a poll now on your window with 5 different options. And the 5 options is anything from yes, I actively engaging, yes, but we are gathering dust. Harry and I had an offline discussion. We quite often see that corporates go through the motion once of developing a business continuity plan, but sometimes when they need to put it in practice, the backup device that they need to use to do certain things or fail over was actually put on a yard sale 2 years ago. So the plans may be slightly outdated. It could also be that you're not sure, depending on where you sit. You don't have one, or you may not necessarily know what it is. So I see 13 responses, which is absolutely awesome. It means I've been able to click the right buttons on the site, which is always a good thing. If you're talking digital things and you don't know what you do, it's a little bit of an embarrassment. But I'm seeing 15 responses, and on the 15 responses that I'm seeing, 70%. So 70% of responses says yes, actively engaging and implementing via regular tests. So that tells us that there's a fair amount of you that actually do that. No, hang on a minute. That 70 has dropped to 63. So Harry, I don't know if there's a mechanism. Can I share the poll actually back with the audience? Do you know if there's a method to do that?
Yes, you can.
Do I it's open, do I close it? No closed polls. Let me just see back to the, okay, I'm going to close the poll now. Thank you. And now let me see. Open. I have a closed poll here, and I can delete it, and I can do many things. Okay, so there I've just shown my ignorance. Apologies for that. You will have to believe me when I share the data with you. 63% says they have an active plan. Two respondents, 11% says yes, but it's gathering dust. 2 says they're not sure. 5% says we definitely don't have it. And then 2 individuals says, what is a business continuity plan? And I think that's probably a little bit of the heat map that we're seeing in front of us at the moment as well. A lot of people have certain things in place. A business continuity plan is about planning, but it's also about actively creating certain steps, introducing simulated threats into your business environment, leaving a flash disk lying around, doing targeted network attacks to actually see how the organizations are doing. We are planning or running a digital resilience workshop at African e-development resource center. And one of the exercises we may include in there is actually a cyber attack simulation. But it's not a technical simulation because we don't have access to your network equipment. It's actually a management situation. And by simulating what happens in a typical environment where there's an overflow of information, and often we don't know exactly how a threat transpires. We just know the threat is present. We see certain things. We either see network traffic at that particular point in time, or systems may be compromised. But based on that, there's a certain set of management actions. And to a large extent, that's what digital resilience is all about. It's not just the technical protection measures, which is, of course, extremely important. It's about how we as a management team actually react to that. And we all know from crisis management that if we pre-plan for certain things, if I know that my daughter is going to arrive at my home with a young man that is full of tattoos on a motorbike without an exhaust, and he's asking her to take her until 3 o'clock in the morning to a club in Nairobi where they're going to drink lots of beer and whiskey, I know there's a particular reaction that I will do. The challenge in the business environment is there are multiple of these threats. And by having certain kind of reactions pre-packaged, ready, thinking through the mitigation, it means as a management team, we then synchronize and we know exactly how we're going to react to that. Now, the reality of cybercrime is that it is just the latest evolution. Many, many years ago, you need a club or a spear to take something from somebody, then maybe a saddle and a crowbar and a gun to rob somebody on a stagecoach. When we started putting things in bank, we needed guns or explosive or a crowbar or the ability to pick open a safe. And today it just means that all of our assets are online. So the cyber crime is just the latest in the evolution of crime because the value of what is in the cyber sphere is so big. And the reason that cybercrime is so prevalent is really, really something that all of you know. It's firstly about the internet, which has enabled us to sit in different spaces today and talk. But that brings certain problems because we are moving information, which is not necessarily now, but could be in a corporate environment through an unsecured environment. Wireless networks, we've just taken that first physical layer of security away. And then human beings, all of us, our particular behavior and how we engage when we deal with all of these things. I would like to attempt now to show you a little video. So let me see if I can do that. If you have not seen this yet, there are multiple of these. I know of at least 7 threat maps online. What it basically is whatever kind of software you're using to secure your particular environment. I'm not entirely sure. I think this one can be from Kaspersky. The moment that you're doing scan or threat protection, it would actually report to a centralized database. And most of these companies over the last 3 years have started to visualize that information. And the visualization of the information, they can then actually show you in real time how attacks are happening globally. So this is just a video that I've made for you. Every single one of those lines is an attack. It shows you where it originates from and where it's actually heading. You could click on a particular country. By clicking on Kenya, you could see the attacks that originate within Kenya, but you can also see the attacks, and you can just see some hit Kenya over there now. And the colors of the lines would then say, is that malware? Is it a phishing link that was clicked upon? Is it maybe a botnet that's doing a distributed denial of service attack? Whatever it is in that particular point in time. It's really, really interesting, and it's somewhat mesmerizing. I find it better than counting sheep at night if you can't sleep. Just open one of these maps and stare at it for a while. You mesmerize, and then about 5 minutes later, you're asleep. Tomorrow you'll find a lot of data used, but still, it's a really fascinating thing to see. So it's really prevalent. We're seeing lots of these things happening globally. And the question then is, so who are actually behind these attacks, and what are they trying to gain? There's different threat actors. There's hacktivist groups. Normally, they're not necessarily for monetary gain. They just want to punt a particular cause. You get organized crime certificates, which are highly, highly, highly organized and really sophisticated. Then you get malicious insiders, which is a little bit of a challenge. We all know the challenge of somebody with technical abilities that sits within our particular domain, and we need to protect against that as well, mostly through proper governance. And then we get the nation states. We actually get countries that actively engage in all of this, and there's lovely examples of this. The Stuxnet example is mostly accepted as the CIA sending Iran a message by crippling their nuclear reactors. Although the Americans are now all about the security within Zoom, they are one of the most active nation states, as Edward Snowden and many of these actors have shown for us. They could either be after money, so at an individual or a corporate level. That could be by multiple levels, increasingly these days, ransomware, where they could lock you out of personal or corporate equipment. It could be after data, intellectual property. Your availability to serve, if you have, especially if you have an online business, distributed denial of service attacks is still a very real threat on the internet. It could be just a reputational or a brand issue where they will sometimes take over a website and then punt a particular course. It just shows the ability to actually do that. So there's different actors that actually threaten our continuity. And there are different things that they're after, which means that if we want to be resilient, we need to know about all of these different things as well. And we also need to have different action plans, a reputational action plan if my reputation is being tarnished, an action plan if I have to pay ransomware, where do I actually engage? There's a beautiful case study, Maastricht University in the Netherlands paid ransomware to a hacktivist group in November last year. So in November 2019, university systems were crippled. They actually paid the ransomware, and then they made all of the information public to help us all to understand how such an attack is actually happening and what can you do about it. Now, these are two of the books that has informed my thinking on this particular topic. The book Future Crimes from Goodman is ages surprisingly well. I think in the year 2020, 5 years later, you would still find it to be an absolutely amazing read. He says we are increasingly connected to things we don't understand. I'm using the big market platform today. I don't think I have spent sufficient time on this particular platform. And every day we're doing new things. So we don't necessarily really understand what we're dealing with. It says many of our connections are untrustworthy and vulnerable. So we need to make sure that we deal with that. But then the one that's really the strong statement, it says that many of these Silicon Valley entrepreneurs that create the latest and the greatest app that we put on our mobile phones or online platforms that we use for what we mentioned, are purely profit driven. And I find that when I go with at Stellenbosch, our students are mostly from sub-Saharan Africa. So when I was hoping to go to Silicon Valley this year in September again. I hope I get the opportunity with my students. When we engage with those entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley, it's about profit, 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 profit. And when you ask them something about corporate responsibility and environmental responsibility and all of these things, it's as if you're coming from another planet. We say, but hang on, we're coming from Africa. It's not like we are leading the world in terms of entrepreneurial thinking, probably besides you guys in Kenya. But at least a lot of the activity on the African continent is about improving the lives of people around us or not exploiting people around us, which is not necessarily the case, surprisingly. And we need to be aware of that. And if it's an American writing that by Americans, probably I'm allowed to say that. But the second part is the one that I use tongue in the cheek, and it says that technology is dominated by two types of people: those who understand what they do not manage, and those who manage what they do not understand. And Pat's law after 14 years is probably as true as it's been. You get people that are really deeply competent in terms of technologies. Many of our corporate IT environments are sitting with really hardworking people that are exceptionally smart, and they know what they're doing. The capacity building is taking place. But often at the managerial level and even at the boardroom level, people are managing things that they truly don't understand. And therein resides a particular problem. Then if you have to fight at credibility at board level, to do certain things, to have a business continuation plan, or to do a business continuity plan exercise to actually see if people behave in the manner that they should be behaving, and the managers don't necessarily buy into that, it means that they truly don't understand the risk that we're sitting with globally at the moment. Now, the problem then is really important to recognize is not an IT problem. Business continuity and building business resilience is not an IT problem, it's a business issue. So it's not about the technology. We have fantastic technologies, and technology will always be, but it's very much about people and processes. We have to ensure that the human beings behave in a particular manner. People quite often say that humans are the weakest link in cybersecurity. I don't believe that. I believe human behavior is the weakest link. We can't change humans. We behave in a particular manner, but we can't change our behavior. And by changing the behavior, we've all changed our behavior in the last month about cleanliness, washing our hands regularly, social distancing, doing certain things. So we've changed the behavior, and we can do the same thing in the online environment as well. We just sometimes need a little bit of a crisis for people to actually do that. And then it's, of course, the processes to regulate all of those things. Now, you can't do any webinar these days without quoting The Art of War. So I complied. I made sure that I brought The Art of War in somewhere. 1,500 years old, apparently, and being translated into English just over 100 years ago. It remains an absolute management classic. And he says, avoid what is strong and strike at what is weak. And it's as simple as that, because Johnny Long, the author of Google Hacking, said, despite all the best computer software and hardware, there's a human somewhere that holds the key to the kingdom. Personally, I'd opt for social engineering or other no-tech hacks to get at the goods. Now, Johnny Long is a technically brilliant human being. So he has the ability to do amazing things, and penetration testing is really technically competent. Now, if a person with deep technical skill set, I would rather opt for social engineering and attacking at that particular level. We should sit up and we should take notice. It's a really interesting book as well. There's a second version of the book out as well. But the central premise is at the human level. Now, I want to be very clear. We can social engineer at the user level, but it goes all the way to the boardroom in our organizations. If we don't have buy-in in the boardrooms, then resilience is simply not going to happen. So I'm starting to wrap up now. If you have any general chats, feel free to do it. I see there's a really interesting couple of things there. In terms of Zoom is one of the best video conferencing solution in the market. I think Zoom is brilliant for the particular role that it is. The thing about Zoom is if I use Zoom, I will use it and then I will quit out of Zoom. I won't remain in Zoom, allow Zoom to remain open in the background when I do my internet banking. And so I have no fear with using Zoom, but I'm not having Zoom auto start up, and I'm not keeping it open the entire day in the background while I'm doing many other things as well. And that's the kind of behavioral, subtle behavior things that we need to do. So I'm starting to wrap up here, and I want to focus then specifically on the resilience part. If we talk about cyber and cybersecurity over the last 20 years, we've really become very good at preventing and responding. So we have really sophisticated technical defenses and increasingly human behavioral aspects as well that helps us to prevent and then respond. But preventing was a very defensive approach, and responding was normally a very reactive approach. We are ready to respond if there is a particular event. And when we talk about digital resilience, we have to talk about adaptive security firstly. So if we talk about the preventative side, we have to work about predicting as well. So in adaptive security, we're saying firstly is we have to look at certain footholds, traces, trends, certain things happening that does not necessarily constitute an intrusion, but could lead to heightened attacks or certain kinds of attacks. And that quite often requires collaboration. It could be that the information to predict what could happen in my business environment does not necessarily hit my business or my business networks. But the moment that I form part of a bigger community, we share, we collaborate, we try to predict, we use predictive models. It means that we can all learn from that. Of course, it's still about preventing, but in this instance, it's more kind of being proactive. It used to be that we search for a particular footprint of a virus. These days, we would look for the foothold of a virus. So we don't necessarily need to know about the existence of the virus. We know what are the telltale signs that a virus leaves behind. If I can be very crude and say, it's a difference between seeing a rat and seeing the droppings and footprints of a rat. You don't have to see a rat to know that there's a rat. If you get into your kitchen and there's droppings or something has stepped into the mud and there's a little footprint, you know that there has been a rat. And that's when you then say, I don't have to see you to know that you're somewhere. What can we actually do about that? Of course, it's still about detecting. Detecting has moved a little bit into real-time detection. At the University of Stellenbosch Business School, for example, our students write online assessments. And when our students write online assessments, the student could sit in Nairobi and the student is writing an assessment that we take off in Stellenbosch. They write simultaneously. But we have really interesting online proctoring software. It takes a picture of the student, exactly what you're seeing of me now, but it also takes a picture of the desktop of the student. And we have more control over what a student is doing sitting and writing an exam in Nairobi than a student sitting in the classroom in Cape Town in South Africa. And that's because we can detect multiple things, included the particular keystrokes. Harry and I have different ways in which we type on a keyboard. Software can actually look and learn our patterns of typing in 10 minutes. I'm about a 4-finger typer. I never learned to touch type properly, and I hit the keyboard fairly hard, and there's a bounce rate and all of these things. And you could actually detect whether it is the person that authenticated that's actually logging in and doing transactions at that particular point in time. But the most important part about digital resilience is the responding part. The responding part is what do we actually do? In the world of risk management, we're saying you can never, ever mitigate all of your risks. It's physically impossible. You cannot do that. If you want to mitigate being in an automotive accident at any stage, then you don't drive a car. If I appreciate that there is something like accidents, then I drive a car slowly, carefully. I put on a seatbelt. I have ABS in my car, and I also have an airbag. That means I have mitigated partly against in an accident, and secondly, the impact of what that accident would have on me. And that's very much the name of the game in digital resilience on the responding side. We see increasing use of heuristics where defensive mechanisms are learning like human beings. We are seeing artificial intelligence, very interesting, intuitive kind of approaches. And a lot of digital resilience is then the organizational reaction, but really database decision making. I'm not just saying something out there. I know certain things. I've seen certain things, and there's a particular way and manner in which I react. That's my summary slide that I would like to conclude on. I know it's a fairly busy slide, but I'd like to try and explain and say that we all understand IT security. We've dealt with IT security. Then we have an operation security. Many of the manufacturing environments, there's SCADAs and PLCs and all of these systems running. The Internet of Things keeps on exploding, and we need to ensure all of these other things connected to our networks. Smart grids mean that grids are forming dynamically. I don't have to lay a cable to a backbone and a router and put it up. These grids form themselves dynamically, which brings their own challenges. But then when we talk about information security, we normally encapsulate all of that. We move to the world of cyber security and says all of this is an interconnected world. It means new kinds of attacks, new opportunities. It means extending our business process to our clients. But the moment that we move from cybersecurity to digital resilience, what we are saying is we're also hitting the domains of enterprise risk management, corporate strategy, corporate governance, and human capital management. Because in human capital management, we need to enable people to behave in a particular way, but also to react in a particular way if there's compromising. In corporate governance, the risk in our IT systems is not isolated from the rest of the organizational risk, and the IT risk is actually company risk. It's not an IT risk, it's a reputational risk, it's a monetary risk, it's a business continuity risk. Corporate strategy, it is also true that we can sometimes at a strategic level have certain responses where we could get value from what's currently happening. A lot of businesses are going to take a lot of strain at the moment. But there are some businesses will actually do fairly well because they know how to adapt and how to react to that. And then enterprise risk management is saying it's not about risk mitigation. It's about risk, consolidated mitigation, but also seeing the opportunity of what we could actually do in the future. So at the board level, we have some challenges. I just wanted to not sign off by saying that at the board level, there's still significant room for growth involved. You will have access to the slide deck. I don't like many texty slides, but this actually is from a PwC report that says, given the reality that the number and seriousness of breaches are growing, it's clear that most organizations need to evaluate cybersecurity investments more clearly and effectively. And that means that all the way to the top of the companies, we need to have these conversations as well. The final comment on digital resilience is also understanding how widely you are impacted. I'm smiling when I deal with businesses in Africa and definitely in North America as well to say, yes, the Europeans are doing GDPR, it's got no impact on us. The reality, if you're doing any business with any European citizen, if one person in Brussels or Denmark or Ireland buys one product from you, it means that you are subject to the regulations that they have implemented. And digital resilience is also seeing the entire scope, not just from boardroom to employee level, but also from all of your customers and all of your business partners and how that impacts on your readiness. So if I can summarize, I think it's firstly looking for attacker footholds and not just malware. So digital resilience means that I'm looking at all of the potential and possible ways in which an attacker can compromise a particular environment. It's acknowledging the inclusivity of technology, humans, and processes, be it humans all the way from a client, from the top to the bottom of the organization. It's accepting that a breach will occur. And I know it's a tough thing to say, but that's the reality. If you're going to drive a car and you drive for 50 years, the likelihood of being involved in an accident from minor to major is probably 95%. That's just the reality. How you're going to react and how you prepare for that is actually the important part. And then also understanding the full reach of being resilient. What does it actually mean to be resilient? If you have a business continuity plan and your business continuity plan includes failover systems and backups and all of these things as well, have you shared that with your suppliers? Have you shared that with your clients or your client networks? Do you have to first tell them what you are going to do the day that things happen? Or is there a trusted entity or a party or a third party that you have already shared your plans with, that your suppliers know? Now, I know oversharing and the risk in oversharing, but business continuity means that I'm part of a network, and I need to understand what the implication is for everybody in that particular network, because that's quite often where a lot of reputational damage is involved. Right, so that was a very quick overview in terms of what we are thinking about digital resilience, a little bit of where the research is heading, where the reality is heading. A very tough topic to do in 35 minutes, so I managed 36 minutes. But that's really what I wanted to do, and I would love to engage with you